Our adventures in Babylon continue with a couple more new servants. Sobroni of G&A Reviews here with another servant spotlight, this time for the Lucha Libre Onesan herself, Quetzalcoatl. We'll be examining her stats and skills, as well as going over pointers how to utilize her effectively, and an overall grade comparing her to how she stacks up to the other 5-star servants. Now, onto Quetz's stats. Quetz has a max HP of 12,960, that's pretty low for a 5-star rider and very low overall compared to all the other 5-star servants. Her max attack of 12,001, however, is the highest among all 5-star riders, and it's fairly high overall for a 5-star servant. Taking a look at her skills, her first skill is Charisma rank A+. It increases the attack of all allies for 3 turns, between 10.5% and 21% depending on level. Her second skill is Wisdom of the Benevolent God, rank A+. It applies Guts 1 time for 3 turns to an ally, reviving you with 1000 HP, and it also increases an ally's Buster card effectiveness for 3 turns, between 20 and 30% depending on level. And finally, her last skill is Lucha Libre rank EX. It increases her critical star gather rate for 1 turn between 300 and 600%. It also increases her crit strength for 1 turn between 30 and 50%, and it charges her NP gauge between 20 and 30%, all depending on level. Taking a look at her passives, she has Magic Resistance rank A, which increases her debuff resist by 20%, Riding rank EX, which increases her quick card effectiveness by 12%, and Core of the Goddess rank EX, which applies damage plus 300 to all of her cards, and increases her debuff resist by 30%. Moving on to her deck and Noble Phantasm, Quetzalcoatl has a Arts Buster deck with Quick Arts Buster Buster, and a Buster Noble Phantasm. Her Noble Phantasm is Quetzalcoatl. It deals significant damage to a single enemy with between a 600 and 1000% damage modifier depending on level. It will also inflict NP seal for 1 turn, and inflict burn for 5 turns, dealing between 1000 and 3000 damage per turn depending on overcharge. Taking a closer look at her cards, we see that her quick card hits 3 times, her arts hits twice, her buster hits 3 times, and her extra attack hits 5 times. She has an NP gain rate of 0.9% and a star rate of 9%. This means that she has good Noble Phantasm gain due to the high NP gain rate and double arts cards, as well as a strong quick card, but her star generating is lackluster because she only has 1 quick card. Quetzalcoatl is an offensive servant through and through. From her very high attack stat to her Buster Noble Phantasm, she oozes potential for high damage, and all of her skills facilitate this strategy. She shares the same charisma as Gilgamesh, making it one of the best vanilla charisma skills in the game. It doesn't have any fancy double buff or secondary effect, but it is a very solid and important skill that grants Quetz and the whole party a very good, low cooldown attack buff. It makes your damage a lot more consistent, and it gives her some team utility. Speaking of which, Quetz's second skill, Wisdom of a Benevolent God, provides another piece of team utility. It's a targetable Guts and Buster buff. A 30% Buster buff for 3 turns is very good, and the Guts is just icing on the cake. And because it's targetable, you can give this buff to an ally to keep them alive, or have them hit a little harder. Although speaking practically, just like with Skahawk's quick buff, because Quetz is going to be the strongest servant on the field 9 times out of 10, you're almost always going to use this skill on yourself. And finally, Quetz is a rare rider with a built-in crit skill. Crit skills are particularly dangerous on riders, more so than any other class of servant, because they have insanely high star weight, and thus crit very often and very consistently, even without many stars being generated. And Quetz is no exception to this rule. Her naturally high star weight combined with her third skill, Lucha Libre, gives her explosive burst damage potential. The buff to star weight ensures that she's going to be gathering all of the crit stars, while the damage buff is decently strong. The only downside is that the buffs only last a single turn, and the skill has a long 6-turn cooldown, which means you won't be able to make much use of it because this skill is going to be on cooldown for the vast majority of the battle. You shouldn't overlook the NP charge on this skill either. It can be great for setting you up for a powerful Noble Phantasm Buster Brave Chain with crits, or for just getting off a quick Noble Phantasm early on in a battle. Skill priority for Quetz is flexible. If you want to go for maximum burst damage or crit team, then you're going to want to level Lucha Libre first for the damage, followed by Charisma for the consistency, and then finally Wisdom of a Benevolent God. If you favor consistent, sustained damage over high burst damage, then you should prioritize Charisma first, and then Lucha Libre, and then finally Wisdom of a Benevolent God. Wisdom of a Benevolent God doesn't scale particularly well with levels. You're only getting about 1% more buster damage with each level, which is why it isn't priority, as you're basically only going to be leveling it for the cooldown reduction. Quetz's power extends into her Noble Phantasm. It's a single target buster Noble Phantasm that can do considerably high damage thanks to your double buff and high attack. It also has a very good Noble Phantasm seal effect, making it very similar to Ozymandias. The burn effect isn't relevant, so overcharge doesn't matter much for your Noble Phantasm, so feel free to lead your Noble Phantasm chains with it. All in all, it's a strong Noble Phantasm with good utility, and thanks to Quetz's NP charge and good NP gain, it isn't too difficult to get it off. She may have a good bit of utility, but don't mistake her for Ozzy. She is first and foremost an offensive juggernaut, more so than arguably any other rider. What stands out about Quetz's damage in particular is that unlike a servant like Ann and Mary, who deals all their damage in one turn, or Ozymandias, who spreads his damage more evenly and consistently, Quetz can do both of those things very effectively. Because of her low cooldown Charisma and high attack stat, even her regular Buster and Arts cards hit hard. And thanks to her high star weight and crit damage buff, she can easily go off and deal ridiculous burst damage on any given turn if she needs to. Her guts also afford some survivability, so she isn't a sitting duck like most bruisers are. It's also worth noting that between her passives, she has 50% debuff resist, so enemy debuffs will miss her very often, making her a good offensive option for challenge quests and tougher boss battles. But while Quetz may be an offensive powerhouse, she does lack in many areas. For one, while she is great with crit stars, don't expect her to generate them for herself. She does need a star generator, or else she's going to lack a large component of her damage. And while Guts is better than nothing, it is only a 3-turn Guts, and in most cases it's not as strong as Invincibility or Evade, so don't expect her to be completely independent. She does still need to rely on good defensive supports if you plan on using her for longer battles. And speaking of her Guts, her cooldowns are on the long end, so aside from Charisma, her other two buffs, while both very strong, have very limited usage. Despite her downsides though, Quetz more than makes up for it with the quality damage that she delivers to teams. When it comes to team comps, you're almost always going to want to position Quetz as the main offensive unit in your party, and you're going to want to use other servants to support her. Servants that make fantastic supports for Quetzalcoatl include Shuten, Nightingale, and Caesar. In reality, there are many servants that pair well with Quetzalcoatl, but these three represent three distinct styles of support for her. Shuten is a fantastic support because not only does she provide a double buff to Quetz since she's a divine servant, but also she's a great source of crit stars so that Quetz will have a consistent 60% attack buff on low cooldown and many opportunities to crit. Nightingale represents more of a Noble Phantasm oriented approach. Angel's Cry will synergize well with your own Buster buff, and it's going to make your Noble Phantasm hit a whole lot harder, which helps out because Quetz does not have a Noble Phantasm interlude. So if you're aiming to end a fight quickly with one strong Noble Phantasm, then Nightingale is going to be your go-to option. And finally, Caesar provides strong all-around support. Charisma is going to buff your non-Noble Phantasm damage considerably, Tactics is going to add a bit more damage to your Noble Phantasm, and Caesar can provide stars pretty well through his Noble Phantasm and Quick Chains to feed your crits. His third skill also buffs your crit damage for multiple turns, making the long cooldown on Lucha Libre not as much of a problem. Caesar is a fantastic alternative to Waver for Quetz, although, of course, Waver still works best because he's Waver and he is king of the meta for the next 48 hours. Defensively, you're going to want to support Quetz with healers. For this, Tamamo is perfect. Tamamo herself provides strong heals consistently, so that even if your Guts is triggered, you can heal back up considerably fast. But Tamamo also provides cooldown reduction, and Tamamo is pretty good at star generating herself for extra crit stars. Quetz's Bondcraft essence is Piedra del Sol, It increases Buster and Arch card effectiveness of all allies by 10%. It's not bad, but you're better off focusing on craft essences that can buff your raw damage or your crit potential. For more damage overall, you're going to want to go with Standard, Buster, and Noble Phantasm buffing craft essences, Limited Zero, Ellie Chan's Quest, Golden Sumo, or Halloween Princess all work great. If you favor crit damage, then I highly recommend Victor from the Moon, Joint Recital, Holy Night Supper, or Lunar Hot Spring. And for some future proofing, Starry Nights makes for a good crit damage and Buster craft essence, especially for shorter battles, while Demonic King of the Sixth Heaven will boost your overall damage dramatically for longer fights. Overall, Quetzalcoatl is not only one of the best riders in the game, she's one of the best offensive servants in the game. When it comes to pure damage, not many other servants match up to her. She has both great sustained damage and explosive burst damage, very similar to Gil. She has very strong passives that make her nearly immune to debuffs. She has decent survivability with Guts, and she has good team utility with her Charisma and Noble Phantasm Seal, as well as her second skill if you ever choose to not use it on herself. She does have a few weaknesses, like longer than average cooldowns, an inability to generate crit stars, which she does depend on, and just a general lack of self-sufficiency. But overall, she still deserves an A from me. If she ever gets a Noble Phantasm interlude or a skill strengthening that adds just a little bit something extra to her kit, I think she would easily be the best rider in the game, but she's still the best offensive rider in my opinion, and will deliver more than enough damage to win you any fight that the game can throw at you. And those are my thoughts on Quetzalcoatl. In some respects, I feel she's very underrated in a similar manner to Cleo. Maybe it's due to her rarity as a story-locked servant, but let me know what you think in the comments below. Don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and consider subscribing if you really enjoyed the video. Join the party over at our Discord, chill with us on Twitch, and follow us on Twitter. And I'll see you all in the next Servant Spotlight. Soberoni out. Later.